This is Pilottown Road from Ship Carpenter Street, turning northwest towards the University of Delaware campus, and then back towards Savannah Road. When you're at this corner, there's a lot of history right here. In the 17th century, Lewes only stretched from present-day Front Street and Savannah Road to Front Street and Ship Carpenter Street, and from Ship Carpenter and 4th to Savannah and 4th. That was it. That was the town. One of the original boundary markers is on display at the Lewes History Museum. And as a matter of fact, it's the one that sat right here at this intersection, on the point closer to town. Looking straight ahead, you see the lightship overfalls. Lightships were essentially floating lighthouses anchored in areas that were too difficult and too dangerous to build a lighthouse. This particular lightship never really served at overfalls. It was at Boston, Cornfields, and Pollock Rip up in lower New England. The Overfalls Light Station protected the Overfalls Shoal and guided mariners from meeting a watery end off of Cape May. Adjacent to the Overfalls is the Lewes Life-Saving Station. The life-saving station was built in 1884 at the site of today's Pilots Association headquarters on Lewes Beach, and served until the Coast Guard was formed out of the life-saving service in 1915. There are many tales of shipwrecks, especially the Great Storm of 1888, the Great Blizzard of 1888 that happened in March, when dozens of ships were wrecked inside the Delaware breakwater. Turning left down Pilottown Road, you will meander along the Lewes and Rehoboth Canal, which was originally the Lewes Creek bed. Lewes Creek extended way past Savannah Road and disappeared into the marshes to the southeast of Lewes. And it was lengthened, straightened, and deepened into the Lewes and Rehoboth Canal in the 19-teens to connect Delaware Bay and Lewes to the inland bays of Rehoboth and Indian River. As you're making your way out Pilottown Road, it's important to note there never really was a separate town called Pilottown. It was more of a neighborhood or an area where pilots lived, tended to be pilots. There are also large farm homes. As you go by 410 Pilottown Road, this is an example of one of those farmhouses. This is called the Russell House, and it was essentially a plantation manor. It may not look like what we think of as a large southern plantation house today, but it was a farmhouse, and the property or the patent for the land extended all the way from Lewes Creek all the way to the south to Canary Creek, about a mile or so away. This farmstead, the goods would be harvested, placed on small shallops or barges, and towed up to Wilmington or sailed up to Wilmington or Philadelphia. As we make our way out Pilottown Road, we will pass the Mall House. The Mall House is at the corner of Pilottown Road and Harborview Road. It's an early type Dutch house with a gambrel roof, built around 1750. Early local lore has that Jerome Bonaparte and Betsy Patterson of Baltimore stayed in this home. Across the fields in the back of the Mall House is the location of the Pagan Creek Dike, which is an important Native American site and feature in our landscape. The back country of the house is shown on a survey by John Shanklin in 1773 and is noted as such. It is today owned by the Colonel David Hall chapter of the Daughters of the American Revolution. Continue to make your way down Pilottown Road, and please stop in front of 624 Pilottown Road. When you get there, you'll be at the house of Dr. Henry Fisher and his son Major Henry Fisher. Fisher's Paradise, as it's commonly known, was later the home of Colonel Samuel Boyer Davis, who was in command of the troops at Lewes during the bombardment of Lewes on April 6th and 7th, 1813, during the War of 1812. There's also some lore surrounding the house, that Caesar Rodney began his famous ride to Philadelphia here. However, we know that not to be the case, but it was long part of Lewes's folklore. Dr. Henry Fisher, for whom the house is named, was an early Lewes physician from Waterford, Ireland, and his son, Henry Fisher, became a famous Delaware River and Bay pilot who was greatly involved on issues surrounding the Delaware River and Bay and selected the site for the Cape Henlopen Lighthouse. During the Revolution, he was known as the ears and eyes of the Continental Congress and would keep Congress appraised of matters down here at the Capes of the Delaware. With Philadelphia being the capital at the time, there was a lot to keep track of, from Tory uprisings on the peninsula to British naval movements off Cape Henlopen. When you leave Fisher's Paradise, you will come to St. Peter's Cemetery on Pilottown Road, also known as the Ancient Burying Ground. The Ancient Burying Ground is first noted in records in 1687, where it is described as, quote, the only known ancient place of a burying ground for the town of Lewes. Today, administered by St. Peter's Episcopal Church, the first burial under the church was completed in 1951. Before then, though, the old cemetery contained only 9 marked graves belonging to the Jacobs, Art, and Naws families. The oldest stone is that of John Jacobs, who died March 1731, aged 45. And the latest stone is that of Sarah Art, who died in 1797, at age 26. The stones are mounted on the inside of the wall, facing out towards the canal. 4 unmarked graves were discovered during excavations in the 1950s. In 1700, another old burial ground in Lewes had been established, known as the Town Burying Place next to the prison. That is the site of present St. Peter's Churchyard on 2nd Street. Across the street from the cemetery is the DeVries Monument. The DeVries Monument memorializes Lewes's place in Delaware history, designating that it is the site of the cradling of a state. The monument is a plain granite boulder on an elevated granite base, surrounded by an iron railing. Located at the far end of Pilottown Road, the monument is dedicated to the site of Swannondale that established legally the basis for the existence of the state of Delaware. The inscription reads, erected by the state of Delaware to commemorate the settlement on this spot of the first Dutch colony under DeVries, A.D. 1631. Here was the cradling of a state. That Delaware exists as a separate commonwealth is due to this colony. The monument was dedicated on September 22nd, 1909, and it was a huge event for the town, with hundreds of people attending, including dignitaries and ambassadors from across the state and Washington, D.C. The cost of the monument, paid for by the state, was $500. As you continue down Pilottown Road towards the University of Delaware campus, the University of Delaware's College of Ocean, Earth, and the Environment was established way back in the 1950s and became first the College of Marine Studies, where research has taken place across the globe on matters involving oceanography, marine biology, marine chemistry, and, at a school in Newark, marine policy. Researchers at the University of Delaware conduct research on far-flung places like Antarctica, Pacific deep sea vents, and right here, the marshes and waters of Delaware Bay. Be sure to turn around and head back into town now, and turn the tour back on when you reach Ship Carpenter Street. As you make your way towards the light at Savannah Road, there are a few important spots to point out. The first on the right is the Cannonball House. Built around 1765 and enlarged again around 1790, the Cannonball House is the Lewes Historical Society's Maritime Museum. It gets its name from the War of 1812, when a British mortar struck the house, leaving an indentation on its foundation near the corner of Bank Street. And across the street from the Cannonball House is the War of 1812 Park, the site of Lewes's fortification in town during the War of 1812. Another fort was located further out Pilottown Road near the DeVries Monument. Across from the park is Lewes's post office. Built about 1914, the post office is an imposing structure, and maybe one that you think is a little too large for a town the size of Lewes, especially about 100 years ago. But the reason it's so big is it not only functioned as a post office, it was also called Lewes's Federal Building. In it were offices for the Quarantine Service, the Corps of Engineers, the Customs office had an office in Lewes, and the building consolidated all these various services into one location. Today, it's primarily a post office, with the upstairs offices being rented out. At the corner of Savannah Road, hang a right, and we'll head down Kings Highway.